This is Completely Ordinary. I'm Joey Lott, and today I'm joined by Hannah Shamji. And hi, Hannah. Thanks for joining.
Hi, thank you.
And I've just got a brief announcement to make before we get started. Um, just because it's a something people might want to know. Lewis has decided that he's no longer gonna be participating in the show, at least for the time being. He's decided he would rather be fishing, and I understand. And so Hannah and I have never met, but we were introduced through Lewis. Lewis got an email. He had an email exchange with Hannah, and he included me. He forwarded that to me, and then had suggested that Hannah might want to join us for a conversation. And so uh, here we are. And Hannah had maybe you can just set it up for you can tell people kind of what prompted that whole exchange.
Sure. So thanks for having me on the show. Um, it's been a little while, I think, since that email exchange, and a lot has happened for me at least since. So it's been about a month. And when I first wrote Lewis, it was with the understanding, or at least in that moment, that there was something that the two of you demonstrated that I was lacking.
Mm-hmm.
And I've watched several of your videos and read through the blogs, and through my own learning, kind of feel that that language isn't necessarily accurate. And yet I feel that while we both might have, any range of experiences from anger to suffering, whatever the case may be, I'm curious and still sort of feel that maybe there's a way that which you deal with suffering or understand suffering or don't resist suffering or something that's different to how I do.
Probably.
Right. But in a way that makes it
Better.
maybe or easier.
Mm.
And that doesn't necessarily mean that you might suffer less, but maybe there's less resistance to that experience. I don't know.
I can only talk about, obviously I don't know your experience, and this is the tricky part, right? Because I was thinking about this the other day. We are trained and accustomed to seek out answers, and we go to people and we say, "Give me the answer." And we're talking, and if we want to know what's the distance from the Earth to the Moon, somebody might be able to give us that answer because they've measured it, and there may be an objective way to find that, and multiple people could measure it and agree upon that.
Right.
But when it comes to experiential things and existential things, I don't, I, I don't know how anybody could honestly say, I know what you feel, what your experience is, and what you should feel, and what your experience should be.
Of course.
But that seems to be what we get from people a lot of the time is, well, this is your problem, and this is what you need to do.
Right.
And when you do that, then you'll be like me, and you won't have any problems anymore. But so all I can talk about is my own experience, and my experience, my story of my experience, and it seems as though uh, that, yeah, it does seem like things are better in a way. I think that that's because of maybe insights or tools that I've discovered that have been helpful for me. But the core of what I'm so it's very confusing to know even what it is that I talk about. I mean, over the course of the last couple of years, where I've been publishing and doing videos and things like that, it's been a learning experience for me. All I knew initially was that I experienced this relief, and that the relief came in a form and in a way that I did not expect, based on what I had been taught in the spiritual teaching realm.
Okay.
And that was surprising to me in a way that it was quite pleasantly surprising in a lot of ways. But then it also made me feel maybe confused about what these spiritual teachers are even talking about, and whether they're being authentic or not. I mean, I kind of suspect many of them are deluded, or they're just outright liars. Um, but but I don't. Again, I have to go back to, I don't know what other people's experiences are. So maybe their experiences are what they claim. Maybe they have this like perfect equanimity where there's no disturbance whatsoever. I don't know, but that's not my experience. So um, it's hard to know exactly. It seems like life is always changing, and then there's a narrative that comes along that says that tells about how it's either good or bad. And so my narrative is that it's good, in that it seems like it's better. But I also have a narrative that it's bad, because it's not, because their ways is not better. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, I don't know if I really addressed your question.
Well, yeah, I mean, I agree. It is hard to know enough to say something to someone else's experience, because you can't know their experience. And yet, I do think that if I have an experience and I'm able to feel better about it in any respect, I may not necessarily need to know someone else's experience in order to share that in a way that might be useful for them.
Yeah.
And yet I'm also hearing from you, and correct me if I'm wrong, that it's not like something concrete. There's not a thing that happened or a thing that takes place that is, this is what is better. And yet there is some relief that you may not have experienced before. Is that?
Well, yeah, I think I mean, it just, this is my story of it. It seems as though through the last couple of years of clarity, of like clarifying what is it I'm even talking about, because initially I wasn't as clear. I'm not perfectly clear on it now either, but it's a little clearer, and it seems as though there's a couple of different things that I've been talking about. One is practical tools or insights that have been helpful to me to have a less stressful experience, even when stress is happening. So for me, this discovery that I had, I was living in Maine, and it was winter. I wrote about this recently on my blog. It was the same time period when I was reading the In Search of the Miraculous, the Ouspensky book, and so it was a very bizarre time for me, and I was very I don't know what you would call it. It was extreme derealization and depression and darkness, and I knew that it just had this awareness that it was going badly, and that if that same trajectory continued, I couldn't really sustain that kind of way of living, that something needed to change. So I was investigating what is what 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 is it that I'm even suffering? I mean, I feel that I'm suffering, but what is this? How do I know that I'm suffering? What's the actual experience? And for me, the core, I don't know if I should say a core, but one core aspect, I can say that, was this chronic muscular tension. So it was a physical thing. And I began to explore whether or not there was something that I could do about that. And I discovered that I could, in fact, release the tension, but I was not skilled at it at the time, obviously. And so it was it turned out to be frightening to release that tension because, and this is again my narrative, but what I found was, for me, it seemed that that tension was a way that I tried to protect myself. You know, I perceived that life was threatening. And so this chronic muscular tension was a way that I could uh, have a sense of protecting myself. And I've referred to that as armoring. It felt like an armor. But with investigation, it became apparent that it wasn't actually protecting me from anything. It was just making my life miserable. Mm. So that was a very useful insight. And it took a long time. It was maybe another 2 years before I finally began in earnest to release that tension and become more skillful at it. And as I became more skillful at it, it seems as though there was a significant improvement in the quality of my life. And that was very welcomed. And so that's a very, to me, it's a very practical thing that I did and that others might be able to do that can have, it can improve a person's quality of life. Right. If that's a problem that a person is experiencing. If a person is, you know, physically relaxed all the time, it's not going to probably help. But I think a lot of people do hold a lot of muscular tension chronically, and so it's been. I think that advice or that suggestion to inquire in that way has been helpful for some people that I've given that advice to. So there's that aspect, which is this sort of practical thing. But the other aspect, which I'd say it's also practical in a way, but it's less. It's maybe a little bit more vague. Let's say that, and that is that's the search for the spiritual search and what to do about that. Because for me, that was a huge source of anxiety. And I'll say about that as well, one core aspect of it, not necessarily the core, but one aspect of it that seems significant was the sense that there's something wrong with me, that other people don't have this, and that there's a way that I can relieve this thing that's wrong with me. And in order to do that, I need the only answer for that is the spiritual thing. So I seek out spiritual guidance, and I'm told that it's whatever, it's karma, it's samskaras, it's, you know, whatever, a whole bunch of things. So I try the things that are suggested in earnest, and no matter how much I did them, I mean, in fact, the more I did them, the more anxious I became, the more I had this sense of pending doom, and it seemed to be getting closer and closer and closer. I'm not getting it. I'm not close enough. I'm not going to figure it out. The end is near. I don't, I didn't even know what it was, what the end would be, but I just had this sense of the shit's about to hit the fan. And so I would try harder and harder and harder and harder. And it's kind of comically sad in a way, because I reflect back on a part of my life when my whole life basically revolved around trying to get it right. I would I would get up at like 3 or 4 in the morning, and I'd meditate, and then I would, and I'd do that for a couple of hours, and then I would try to, and then I would chant for a long time, and then I would pray for a long time, and then then it would be time for breakfast, and and breakfast I had to make sure it was the most sattvic pure diet, and I had to bless the food and think only nice thoughts, and you know, all of these things in order to try and get it right. And my whole day was like that. And so I guess it would be through a process of inquiry. I'm not really sure about this, but it well, okay, yeah, it was through a process of inquiry. I think that's true, but it was also through um, it involved looking, you know, is inquiry. But I think for me, when I heard inquiry before, I thought inquiry is you just question, you know, what is this, in order to find it out. For me, the discovery was that, at least my experience of inquiry has been, it's asking the question, looking to find out what is this, and becoming increasingly comfortable with not knowing, with not finding an answer. I say increasingly comfortable. That's going to suggest that I'm now comfortable with, you know, that I've achieved some state of comfort with not knowing. It's not entirely true. It's just, it's more to me that I was faced with, again, I saw that the trajectory I was on was not sustainable. I mean, I couldn't, in order to, because what I was having to do was increase the amount of effort that I put in to getting it right, in order to, and I was still losing ground in terms of how I was feeling. All right, I felt less okay, and I was doing more in order to maintain even less okayness.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was clear that was not sustainable. I was losing ground. And so, you know, I mean, I wasn't actually aware of Howard Hughes at the time, but are you familiar with Howard Hughes?
No.
He was this American mogul who, and he had severe OCD, and he ended up, he wore tissue boxes on his feet for reasons only known to him. And, you know, that was basically where I was headed. You know, it was like that kind of intensity of, I need to get it right. So, and the only way to get it right is to wear tissue boxes on my feet. I mean, it's tragic. And so that was not what I wanted. And I had, you know, at some point I just had to take a real honest look. Is what these people who are promising me, you know, heaven and nirvana and enlightenment and awakening and on and on. I mean, are they able to make good on that promise? Is it actually true? Is it working out? And it was hard to be willing to let that go and accept that that I didn't even have a reference point to know what okay would really be.
Mm.
So I still don't know if I've answered your question, but I've given a lengthier response. but I'm curious. I don't want this to be a one-sided sort of thing. I mean, so in your email, you had said some things that I thought were really insightful, and so you had described that you're working toward becoming a counselor.
Yes. Yeah.
And this, so you're taking a course, a personal development course.
Yeah. So it's the first part of that course is to sort of clear your own bias so you don't project that
Mhm.
on the client. Yeah, yeah. So some people just take that course, but it's very much you receive the practice and I guess do inquiry to understand your reactions to events and individuals and sort of what your tendencies are or what your triggers might be so that you can be more aware of them and not land them on someone else when you're counseling them. And I guess so that for me has been a really good experience, but really kind of challenged the way that I was going through life before. So I don't have the same experiences as you were mentioning in terms of the actual actions, but the seeking very much so. Not liking how I'm feeling and looking to other people for answers. Again, like not sustainable. And I mean, it doesn't make you feel any better, right? Because I found that the process, the way that it was set up, either in like a religious form or if I was just kind of seeking through, you know, Eckhart Tolle or Adyashanti, whoever the case might be, the way it's set up is that if you're not in the state that they are, it's because there's some inadequacy of yourself, right? Which perpetuates because you keep putting it on yourself, right? It's not that something's wrong with their teaching, it's that something's wrong with me, that I don't get that teaching. And so it was only starting this counseling in this first year that I actually have had to sort of separate and start to not look for secondhand direction. And even start to be able to feel whatever I'm feeling without looking for a resolve, whether it's, you know, reading or watching a video or something to inspire me that like, hey, it's okay, whatever you're feeling. And so that for me has been really big because a lot of my suffering was the fact that I'm here and I want to be there. And the counseling has helped me to sort of understand why I wanted to escape, and also is the reason that I am reacting even valid or true. The problem I ran into is that, so I'll maybe use a concrete example. So if I feel insecure in a particular instance, that maybe, you know, I'm talking to a friend or I'm not getting the kind of attention that I want from that friend. Instead of it being about fixing that situation, the counseling technique would be, well, you know, looking at your own insecurity and actually finding the root of that in your childhood and understanding your innocence behind that. And that sort of opens you out to not feel that insecurity to the same extent. Like maybe you still feel it, but maybe you don't need to act on it. And maybe you don't hold the other person responsible for it, which has been really good. And yet I feel that it's still stuck in this world of like, well, let me just tell myself a better story about myself so that I don't feel bad. And yet to me, it all seemed like it's still made up, right? I'm still thinking, well, I'm assuming, okay, yeah, you know what, I was innocent when I first learned this in X and X scenario, which is somewhat arbitrary true. Like, I don't know why I feel the way I feel. So I guess I feel that like even my reaching out to Lewis initially was like the root is that there's an element of me wanting to control what I'm feeling or move away from it. And do you have something I can do so that I don't feel this?
Yeah.
And that if I don't then I have to sit with that question of like, well, what do I do? Like, what is this? Right? Like I'm so used to sort of seeking and improving and moving through life that way. And it becomes very difficult to feel like I don't need to do anything is also a very difficult feeling.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
I can relate to it. Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, it's interesting to me because I wonder if there's anything that is not going to be a story. You know, I mean, when I look in my own life, if it's possible to get away from a story, man, I don't know. I don't know. It seems as though there's always a story going on, and um, in the spiritual teaching realm, it's a very popular idea that stories are bad. That there's some kind of, there's pure consciousness or something. There's awareness that is not a story, and that's what we're supposed to aspire to. But it sets up the same dynamic, right? Which is that you haven't achieved that yet, so you need to try harder. Get rid of the stories. Oh, you're still telling a story? Well, shame on you.
Yeah.
But for me, it's been interesting to question that, just to see, is the because when I take a look, I don't find anybody who's telling the story.
Mm-hmm.
There may be a story happening, but it's like what you say about the so in this counseling work and or in the personal development course, the process is you look to see what the origin or the source of this reaction is,
Right.
rooted in childhood, and then you said, so you find what that is, and then you realize that in a sense it's kind of arbitrary. I mean, it might be that, it might not be, though. Who could
Right.
know?
Yeah.
So it seems as though we do that with the, and I'm not sure exactly where I was going with that, except just to say that it seems like there's somewhat of a parallel where if something is useful, so you do this process, you find out where it's rooted in your childhood, and that process is useful to you, it helps you in some way, you perceive a relative benefit from it,
Right.
even though you recognize that it's arbitrary. So what's the problem? And in the same way, I would say, for me, to look and see, there's a story going on, but what's the problem? Because we're always looking, I mean, it seems like it's always relative, but we're looking for an absolute.
Right.
And that's to me, that was it's the thing that it just puzzles me. I don't understand when people are talking about that. I see this all the time, because I sort of despise Facebook. People have the ability to sign me up without my authorization for groups on Facebook.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So I just start, all of a sudden I'm signed up for people think I want to be part of their non-duality Facebook group, which anybody watching this, I really don't want to be a part of it. I'm sorry. um, but I'm too lazy to unsubscribe most of the time, so I get all of these emails, and they have all of these quotes about the absolute and pure consciousness and awareness, and you are not your body, you are not your thoughts, you are the awareness in which it is all the space in which it is all happening, and yada yada yada. And I'm thinking, who is actually having this experience? I mean, if somebody's claiming it to say I am the absolute, guess what? I mean, it's really ridiculous.
Yeah. I mean, well, I can help you with your Facebook settings, but I mean, yeah, like what you just said too about awareness and that space. You are not your body, you are not your mind. To me, once upon a time, that sounded great, right? Like how can I dissociate so that I don't feel what's happening in my body and what's happening in my mind, and I'm not at the mercy of it. And, you know, I definitely enjoyed hearing something profound, because then I could take that on and tell someone else and be like, well, you know, look at what I have to say. And yet I find, I guess I struggle with, if there is that space of like, well, I don't know. And similar to what you said, I think I'm becoming more okay with I don't know, or maybe just more familiar with it. There's this part of me that keeps kind of nagging, that's sort of like, what if it is something, like, what if you are supposed to get to this point before you die? Like, what if there is some purpose or some thing? While knowing that putting that in a box, like making a purpose, would kind of, you know, belittle it in a sense. What do you, I guess I'm struggling with, like, well, what should I do? Like, what do I do when those moments come? Do you just ignore the story and like keep going about your life? And maybe sometimes I feel paralyzed by those thoughts, so it's difficult to go about my life. And am I supposed to be at a point where there are other people, and quite a big handful of them, who seem to have it all figured out in a similar vein, or at least claim to?
Mhm.
So like, here I am thinking like, well, I would hate to die and be like, well, you know, you really should have figured it out and you had all the resources and tools. And I'm sort of like, well, I just thought it was bullshit, so I didn't. Yeah, I mean, what do you do when you feel like, when a story comes up that maybe doesn't feel that great? What do you do? Do you go with the story? Do you find that you have that same sort of struggle? Is it that, well, this is a bad story, so I'm going to pull out of it, and like you try to recenter?
Well, okay, so it seems like you're asking what's my strategy, and I do have a strategy in some areas of experience, but you're also talking about a specific sort of phenomenon, which is the doubt about maybe I actually am supposed to do something. I do have a purpose, and it's been, in a sense, it's mandated by a higher authority. So if I screw it up, then I'll be punished, or I'll be in trouble, or I won't get the reward, or something like that.
And I realize that this is all like couched in things that if I look at individually, I don't necessarily agree with.
Yeah.
And yet it's almost like this, just, it's a reflex or a habit. It just comes up and I'm sort of stuck to answer it.
Yeah. And so that's the one thing. This was interesting because last week I had a conversation with Scott Killaby, and I asked him, do you still experience seeking in any aspect of your life? And he said, yeah, of course I do, but not for, I don't seek for a sense of self.
Okay.
And I can relate to that because what you're saying, you're asking about, or you're talking about this habit of when this doubt arises, or the worry about maybe there is some purpose for my life and I'm not on purpose. I'm missing out on what I'm supposed to be doing, and then I'm going to die, and then some authority is going to call me out on it and say, well, you know, what were you doing? Like, you had this whole life, and we put you in the self-development course so that you could learn exactly what you're supposed to do, and you didn't do it. So now you got to go down a level. You've been demoted.
God forbid. Yeah.
I used to have worry about that, not in those exact terms, but in a vague sense. I did worry, like I said, I worried about getting it right. It seemed
Right.
just very, very, very important. Now it doesn't. I don't know why, and that's interesting. I don't know exactly why. You'd probably like to know why, so that you could replicate the process.
Well, I guess I don't. I don't see this as like. I know that on your blog there's that wanting to make sure that people don't see what you're saying as an authority. And for me it's more like, well, it's more information, right? Like maybe I agree with it, maybe I don't. And as you were sort of relating to what I said, like I see the stupidity in it. Like I see the humor behind it too. And yet there are moments when I don't. And if I'm and that I'm more caught in like the higher level of that story where it doesn't sound as silly. It sounds more like I need to find, my passion or route and feel grounded that way, which is a nicer way of saying, I just want to make sure I have my shit together before I die, in my case.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess when I find I'm able to strip it down and look at like, well, what is that baseline fear that I have? It usually looks kind of silly, and then I can be like, okay, do I really agree with that or not?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and yet I don't know. I guess there is that intrinsic fear that's like, well, is that enough? Is that okay? Is that
Sure. What's very interesting about this is that I had this. I think I've talked about this before. I had this what I thought. I've gotten it. I've had this awakening. It wasn't. I couldn't point to an event, but I still. It seemed as though I had I discovered whatever it was that people were talking about. Just seemed clear, and that went on for a couple of months, and then I one day I realized it seemed to be slipping away. I wasn't able to maintain that, and I was trying to do something to find that state again. And in a way, I guess it was very challenging. I remember I remember lying down and just sort of having to take a look and face that I might not be able to maintain it. In fact, it may never return. And I may be stuck with a undesirable state, maybe forever. And maybe I'll have failed. And maybe there is no redemption. And maybe I'll be punished. It was just sort of accepting all of that in a way. And it was a relief. That, for me, that was a relief. Just to finally not have to try and achieve anything. Yeah, let me rephrase that, because I try and achieve many things. I'm kind of a ambitious person in many ways, but I seem to have lost the sense that I need to achieve anything in order to be worthy of life. And so there's not really much on the line anymore, except for my being able to feed myself and things like that. So I can still experience anxiety about that, about being able to have the things that I want, but that fear about, well, what if I die having failed at my life's purpose.
Not so much.
Not so much, but it's that, you know, I use that Santa Claus metaphor oftentimes, and it's just because seems very appropriate to me. So it's in the same way that I don't have anxiety about Santa Claus arriving any longer. It's not because I know definitively for sure. I have, you know, the signed proof from God himself that there is no Santa Claus. It's just, I'm pretty sure there's not a Santa Claus. Don't know how to prove it. I just don't. I'm pretty sure there's not one.
Yeah.
And I can't prove that I don't have a life's purpose, but I'm pretty sure that I don't.
Yeah. And I think at the same time, I don't know that I necessarily want to have those questions answered. I mean, I don't really know what I'm looking for when I ask those questions, or, you know, even like where it's coming from, or what would that really change for me, having that answer. And what you mentioned earlier about sort of acknowledging that, you know, you may have this uncomfortable experience maybe forever. When I've had an experience that I sort of stopped emotionally fighting against, and just sort of accept that, like, okay, well, yeah, you know, whether I like it or not, this is how I'm feeling right now. And maybe I'm not technically responsible in the sense that I didn't choose that feeling. It just kind of showed up. Yeah, I mean, that certainly feels a bit better. It might not take the feeling away, but it definitely removes some of that urgency to act just to get away from it. But I find that I need, if I'm in those moments, it's not as automatic of a response to sort of know better. It's more that maybe I kind of struggle a little bit still, and then I might look for some kind of inspiration or read something, or, you know, I see what I'm doing and that, like, hey, this doesn't feel good, and it's probably because you're fighting the fact that you're upset. Well, you can't help but being upset, and it still might take me a while to kind of come down to that place. And then also to see that, well, maybe the root of my being upset is, like, maybe I feel insecure because I feel unworthy or not enough, or, you know, that which, again, I mean, even those are, like, to me, it's like a huge thing to work through, right? Like, if I feel that at the base of my insecurity is I feel like I'm not enough, and it's something that I've held for a long period of time, I mean, you know, is it really enough for me to go back into my childhood and find the innocence in that one time is sufficient? No, not from my experience, right? Like, it's a big, weighty claim that I hold, that I think it's daunting for me to think, well, every single time I meet a situation that triggers that, I'm going to have to go and, like, dissect and, you know, tease it or whatever the case may be to get to that point of feeling better. And what I'm hearing from you, which, you know, maybe I'm mishearing, is that process doesn't happen. There's less of work, for lack of a better word, to I mean, I'm caught in my language here, but
well, yeah. So this goes back to what I was saying about there seem to be two. There's this there. I don't know what we want to call that. There's this sort of sphere of experience. You know, a certain subset of experience in which that, for me, that there's a seeking that just doesn't happen. Seeking for my life's purpose doesn't seem necessary or valuable. So there's that. But then you asked about strategy. I have strategy in my life when I'm feeling things that are unpleasant, and I'm happy to share that strategy. I'm not sure that it would be useful to anybody else, but because I'm not sure it's useful to me. I don't know, but it's a strategy that I tend to use is because it seems like my personality is such that I try to do something about whatever it is, and I've seen the failure of that. So I've taken a different approach, which is just to not try to do something about it. So the sense that I have, sort of not necessarily to be taken literally, but it's sort of metaphorically, as though I'm sinking into the experience rather than trying to overcome it.
Mm-hmm.
And that tends to offer insights to me because it reveals the things that I can do, and also the things that would be futile to do.
Mm-hmm.
Also offers insights into what is it that I'm actually feeling. Sometimes it's just a matter of we talk about feeling, and then we want to do something about it. We want to find the origin of the feeling. But actually, in my experiences, not oftentimes, it seems as though all the time the feeling is happening in the body now. So even though we could tell a story about it, and that may be useful for sure to trace it back to some childhood memory, but the actual experience now presently is in the body. And what I found is that for me it can be helpful to just allow that experience now and to actually be curious about what the experience is, because oftentimes there's the experience, there's a feeling, and then I have a story about it. So the feeling is whatever it is, and then the story says this feeling is anger because somebody did something, or this feeling is resentment because of this situation, or this feeling is depression because of whatever. But when I actually just feel it and I'm curious about it, it turns out that sensation is what it is.
Yeah.
And for me, I'm clarifying that each time because I don't want people to think that this should be applicable to them. I don't know that it would be. I'm just describing my experience. For me, to be able to experience the sensation directly without trying to mediate it through a story. Again, not that stories are bad, but it's just that it's a different kind of quality to the experience. Just to experience the sensation directly, it seems to be, for me, useful in some way. If there are ways that I can soften the sensation where I've been resistant to it, because oftentimes I find that there's a sensation and I'm resisting it. I'm tensing up in my body. Could be subtle, and then just to soften that or relax that seems to allow for some kind of shift. But this is tricky, right? Because people, I think, have this idea. I get a lot of emails and comments from people who they want to know, is it okay for me to do something if I have unpleasant experience? Is that spiritually acceptable? Am I not supposed to do that because 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 you said, or because Adi Ashanti said that you're supposed to only be a witness or something, and I don't know. I don't know about if it's acceptable or not. If there's like some higher authority, I don't know. Maybe there is a higher authority. Maybe there is God, and God has rules, and one of the rules is you're never supposed to ever do anything. God delivered this experience to you exactly like this, and don't you dare do anything about it. If you're depressed, you just stay depressed.
Just deal with it. Yeah.
And I don't know. Maybe that's true, but all I can say is that's not what I do. Because I'm not actually interested. I'm motivated really by wanting to feel better, and I don't see that that's it. I should qualify that wanting to feel better when I'm feeling bad, and I don't know. I don't personally have a problem with that. I don't see that that's wrong, and I don't experience suffering from that I'm aware of. I did experience suffering when I felt that I had it was mandated by some higher authority that I had to fix myself. But just but without that compulsion to do something to fix myself, I don't experience suffering when I just want to feel better and do something in order to bring that about. Which is one more note about that, though, which is that oftentimes I'm not able to do anything about it. It means there's some, or I should say, I don't seem to be able to do anything about it in the short term. I had a experience just a couple of days ago, and it was one of the most unpleasant days that I can remember certainly in recent history, and if not forever. It was extremely unpleasant, and it's hard to explain why. And there was nothing I could do about it. So that that happens.
Yeah. I read this in one of our books for counseling. I think it was an article or something that without your mind regurgitating a thought, the feeling itself, like the biological experience of the feeling, lasts like 90 seconds or something like that. And the only like that the repeat of it, the thought, is what triggers the suffering, quote unquote. Yeah, I mean, that what you had mentioned in terms of the higher authority, that's something that in a religious sense I used to feel that too. It was very like, I need to do X set of things, and if I operate outside of that, I will have to face consequences. And so my whole approach to being a good person, or what I define as a good person, or the religion defined as a good person, and having to kind of uphold that, and really reprimanding myself in a lot of ways too if I didn't meet that criteria. And have found, since I've sort of stopped practicing, that it is there are a lot of layers I find that I've needed to really look at in order to be able to be honest in my approach. So honest with people, honest with whether I actually like something or not, honest enough to be able to say what I'm really feeling in the moment, and not put on a face if I feel otherwise. And that I found that taking away those layers, or not necessarily taking them away, but actually looking at them as opposed to just kind of blindly going and feeling at their mercy, and having, I liked that word that you used, more of a curiosity about them, that like, okay, well, what, this is maybe some information here that I can take a look at. I have found some, maybe not relief, but less Like it sucks less to not fight so much, or to not kind of, make yourself jump through so many hoops and say that, well, maybe I should do this instead of doing this because, I'm going to face the consequence. Or maybe I shouldn't be honest because it's not appropriate or allowed, or, whatever the case might be. So that's something that when you were saying kind of stuck out, I can relate to that piece of curiosity. And that also, I find that same curiosity, if I can actually own the fact that, like, I don't know the answer to most things. Like, I don't know if what I think is right is actually right. I don't know. If I can actually be honest with that, it's not so bad. Like, it's difficult for me to stay in that. And yet I find that is sometimes the only honest thing I can really say, that, like, I don't really know how to do this, or if what I'm reading is going to work, or anything. And in that, like, I guess, surrender, for lack of a better word, there is a bit of space. It loses that, like, urgency.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It was something that you said about that article that you read. It's interesting to me. I wonder what the basis of that claim is, that the sensation is only experienced for 90 seconds. I can see how that there may be some kernel of truth in that sometimes, especially if, that model. I'm assuming that the whoever wrote that was working from the same model of that your feelings in reaction or response to what's happening now are conditioned by your history, particularly your early childhood history. It's an interesting model, and I think it may have some validity. I mean, I've written about that in some of my books. There's that whole model of memory. It's very interesting, and there's a lot of compelling evidence for it. But I think it would be important to qualify it, to say that not all feelings that happen presently are, even if many or most are conditioned by the past, not all of them are. For example, if a person has an injury or an illness, then there may be feelings associated with that have nothing to do with conditioning from the past. Like, for example, I have an interest that I've expressed on multiple occasions in chronic Lyme disease, and there are certain symptoms of Lyme disease, particularly with some of the co-infections, like Bartonella is one of the common infectious organisms that causes one of what they call co-infections with Lyme. And one of the common symptoms of that is unexplained rage. Now, if I'm talking with somebody who has an infection, a Bartonella infection, who experiences unexplained rage, and I say, well, the problem is that you're attaching a story to it. Actually, this is just some conditioning from the past. It was because your father did this, and if you would just, let's do some work and you can heal that, and then you won't have to experience this problem anymore. That would be cruel, really, because then on top of having this unexplained rage, which is extremely unpleasant, now this person also has to feel this shame of, I'm not doing it right.
Yeah.
It's all my fault.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I mean, so I don't know how true that claim is. It was something that struck out as interesting to me, and it's not always been my own experience, or maybe even once or twice I noticed that if I fully, if I stopped kind of fighting it and actually gave myself permission to feel something, didn't last as long as it otherwise has. And certainly as a symptom, if an emotional response is a symptom, yes, saying that this is the result of a story is very belittling. And I wonder too, if it's not as a symptom, if it's someone's reaction to injury, that is maybe triggers a feeling of helplessness, or sort of that an anger that maybe I don't feel as capable as I should or as I want to. From my experience of having injury, I find that sometimes that is tied to, so when it's not a symptom, sometimes it is tied to something that I've felt in the past, that feeling helpless was particularly problematic for me before, and this really kind of honed in on that. And sometimes not, which I guess comes back to the I don't know, is there even an answer? I don't know.
Right. I'm inclined to think that there's not, but I think that we can tell stories that may be useful. Because that story about you only experience the sensation for 90 seconds if you don't attach a story to it. I'm sure that story can be useful.
Yeah, I mean, it can sound nice. Sure. Yeah.
Well, right. I mean, I've actually seen it. It seems as though I've seen that story be useful, both in my own experience and in talking with other people. I mean, I've talked with people and done some just inquired into some things with them on occasion, and it seems to have brought about a pretty quick and long-lasting shift. In that one thing. If a person has this one kind of problematic response in a certain situation, then inquiring into that sometimes, and some of the ways that I've inquire into things sometimes involves I'll ask the question, what's the first time that you remember feeling that feeling? So it just brings up that whatever that earliest memory is where they remember feeling that feeling. So it's kind of does the same kind of process that you're describing. And sometimes seems to be a long-lasting positive shift, just to have that, to be able to make that association, and then to be able to I don't know what you would call that, release that association, or see it allow it to become more transparent or something like that. So it can seem to be helpful.
Yeah.
But other times it's not. So.
Yeah, I think one of the sticking points for me when I was more avidly seeking, spiritual advice or direction was that, well, if I keep having to seek, is it really working? Like, if I have to do the same thing over and over again, I mean, how effective is it? And that seemed to kind of work for me, that, well, maybe, in the same way that as if I become a counselor and someone has to keep coming to me, I would think that, well, maybe I'm not doing as good of a job. Like, maybe the idea, if it's for the same issue, is that I should effectively be able to help them alleviate something without them having to keep coming back, unless it's sort of new layers. And I mean, maybe I'm sure there's a bunch of caveats to that, but that certainly helped me realize that, well, maybe this isn't a fact, right? Like, maybe this isn't absolute truth. So.
Yeah, right. But I mean, it's something interesting about what you said. I in general, I think there's a lot of truth in that, or at least it would be nice, sort of ideal, where it's one and done or something like that, where the person doesn't have to keep on seeking for some kind of help. But I also think, to be fair, that I'm not sure that we can avoid all dependency.
Mm.
So I think it's up to a person to evaluate for herself or himself whether or not whatever they're doing is worthwhile. For example, I eat on a daily basis. I'm dependent on food. I could complain about that and say, why I've eaten for all these years. Why haven't I learned the lesson? Why do I have to keep going back and doing it?
Right, right.
Every once in a while, it feels that way, to be honest. Again, I have to do this again. Didn't I do this earlier? But but if somebody gets benefit out of something, like I perceive benefit, I guess I perceive benefit in being alive, and eating is useful for that. I mean, this is funny because somebody wrote me recently and said that he had once been duped by the breatharian claims. I don't know if you're familiar with breatharianism, but it's
very little, yes.
And I had at one time too, when I was in college, I read a book and I thought, wow, this is great. And the appeal was less when I discovered that I was starving. But I think it's up to the person to judge if they feel that they're getting benefits that are worthwhile. So for me, the benefit of being alive is worth having to eat on a daily basis. And I know many people watching this will say, "What is he talking about? I love eating." I mean, it's fantastic, good for you. But the point being just that if somebody, let's say somebody has lived 20 years as an alcoholic, and then one day they just becomes extremely clear for them that is killing them, and that's not what they want. Well, actually, let's say there's two people, and they're both alcoholics for 20 years, and on the same day, hallelujah, they wake up and realize this is not working. I need a change in my life. One of them is able to just stop being an alcoholic. Maybe he goes to a counselor or something, I don't know, or he goes to a hands-on healer and gets tapped on the head or something and has this experience. And from that day forward, is able to drink socially if he wants to and doesn't have a problem. Doesn't have to keep going to therapy or to groups or do any kind of practice. Just
yeah.
And then the other one has to go on a daily basis, let's say, has to go to some kind of group. I don't know, 12-step, non-12-step, whatever. He's got his support, and he relies upon that in order to not drink himself to death. And let's say that both of them perceive that their lives are better than they used to be as an alcoholic. So for one of them, it's worth it to him to have to go to his support group every day in order to stay sober, because a sober life for him is worth that. Mm-hmm. It's easy, I think, to judge and say, well, the one is more of a success than the other. The guy who doesn't have to go to the support groups and who can drink socially and doesn't have the problem is more of a success. But I'd say that success isn't really doesn't even make sense. What actually makes sense is just, is it worth it to you? And if it is, then fantastic.
Yeah. I mean, definitely. I think I should put, like, that's a fair point to put that, for me to put that caveat that, in my experience of the spiritual seeking, I found it was redundant. Like I was kind of going in circles, and for me, I felt, well, if I feel no further or no better, and that's what I'm trying to get out of this, and it's been X number of years, then maybe, it's not, maybe I should ask myself instead of asking someone else.
Mm-hmm. I can relate to that.
Mm.
That's why please don't invite me to your Facebook groups.
Can I ask so just, what is, for example, the day that you mentioned a few days ago that was very difficult, um, kind of a challenging experience, and maybe one of the worst that you've been through.
Mm-hmm.
So what did that look like? What did you? How did it change the way that you went through when you kind of, did you do physical things to alleviate, but sort of the mental story was kind of quiet? What did that look like?
I think I was mostly just in physical pain. I mean, it wasn't it wasn't the sort of thing that I used to think of as physical pain.
Mm.
But for me, I've come to realize a lot of the anxiety and psychological pain, discomfort, for me is primarily a physical pain. And it's just sort of a subtle physical pain. And so that was mostly what I was experiencing. I just was unable to really function. Was there a story? Probably a lot of stories. I had I had some work to do, and I was unable to do it. I just had to go lie down. Just just wasn't functioning, and it was like my guess would be my brain was inflamed. Pretty sure that's what was going on. It's hard. Your brain doesn't have any pain receptors, they say.
Mm.
So you don't feel like when you get a headache. It's not inside of your skull. It's the muscles
Mm-hmm.
around the skull. But inside the skull, there are no pain receptors. So when people have inflammation or swelling in the brain, they don't experience pain in the way that we normally think of it. But it can manifest as all kinds of emotional or psychological disturbances or cognitive problems, which is sort of what I was experiencing. Just unable, I just couldn't do or focus, and I kind of I mean I think fundamentally it was just brain inflammation, but the subjective experience of it, or the way that we would normally talk about it, it sort of felt like an existential crisis of sorts that didn't have a specific story attached to it. It just felt like, oh my God.
Wow.
Yeah.
I'm glad you're feeling better.
Me too.
I recently have been battling with a lot of nausea. I've had a number of tests to see where it's coming from, and they haven't found much of a source. But for me, it's a bit of a mind trip because it's not physical in that you can't see it, right? It's not like a gushing wound, and so it really kind of is triggered more so when I'm stressed, or at least it'll get exacerbated when I'm stressed. So it's been pretty challenging to deal with, and I find I can kind of stomach my way through it, but less able to at times not feel any resistance, like complete sort of helplessness, and even like, what can I do to fix this? And I haven't found anything. Any kind of medication is just to sort of sedate sedate me, which again, I can't really function in that. And there really isn't anything to do. I mean, you can, and yet, like, there's that urge to want to find something to do, right? Like, I can't just be stuck in this. I mean, so I would try to take comfort in the fact that, well, how long can this last continuously, right? Like,
yeah. Do you really want to find out?
yeah, right. And so I'll kind of, rest on the fact that, well, even can my body maintain at this level, this level of nausea? Which, I mean, surprisingly at times, yes, it can. But it's, I guess, has really pushed me to the door of, like, you cannot, like, this is not for you to control. This is not, has nothing to do with you. Like, I'm just kind of, there's just me and then there's nausea and that's it. Like, I can't do anything. Whatever I do only makes it worse. And so that's been a huge opportunity for me, I guess, has been something I've picked up on that I can kind of try to pull into the rest of my life, because how much I really wanted to control the nausea, I saw that replicated in other areas of my life. And so that's been interesting to kind of be up against this door that I'm like, well, I'm at a loss entirely. So, I guess that's one tiny positive against the nausea.
It's very, very interesting. I was reflecting on something similar just yesterday. I was thinking about, people often want to know, is there something I can do? Should I do nothing? In some sort of vague sense, like in an existential sense, am I figuring out what I'm here for, and all these sorts, life's purpose kinds of way, or spiritual way. They want to know, should I do something or not? And my sense of it is there definitely is something you can do, but it's not, or just from in my experience, there's something I have done, but it was in a way a complete opposite of what I thought of as doing, because everything that I thought to do, everything that came to mind to do, was like you're describing it, just sort of made things worse. So for me, in a similar way, I think becoming very sick was very helpful to me. This is me putting a positive spin on it, of course, but it seems as though it was helpful in that, I suffered tremendously. I mean, I'm reflecting on it, I'm thinking, how did I do that? That's insane. But I suffered tremendously, and then I got to a point where I was so sick, I just couldn't do it anymore. So everything that I thought of as doing, all of my strategies to try and fix it and control it, became unavailable. So then I really had to take an honest look, maybe for the first time, just to see the failure of that whole approach, and to, in a sense, take a step back and recognize that's not the whole of what's available. That there's another kind of doing, which is what I would refer to as inquiry. Again, not to figure it out, but to just really be curious. And that is a doing, in my experience. There is a doing to it, but it's not something that I was accustomed. I didn't know how to do that. It was totally outside of my understanding, until I was forced, in a way. My back was against the wall, and I recognized that the failure of everything that I had done, and I was forced to take a look at what else is available.
Yeah.
So it, in a way, it's kind of unfortunate, because a lot of people who are, they experience that they're suffering, and they're looking for some kind of relief from that, but it seems as though there, many, if not most, if not all people in that situation will be unable to actually hear what it is that is probably necessary and would be helpful, because the, in a sense, the filter that they have is their understanding, whereas what I'm referring to as inquiry is actually, it's like diving into not understanding. So if you're filtering everything through understanding, how do I understand? How do I figure it out? How do I solve this? You'll miss out the on the inquiry, because the inquiry is not that. It's the opposite.
Yeah. I mean, words are a bit of a challenge. Kind of have to like talk your way around certain words, and there's a ton of caveats too, right? I mean, always, very prominently from your blog and when you speak, it's very like, this is my experience. Whether or not it applies is really something that you can't know,
Mm-hmm.
which is it's difficult. Like as someone who, for myself, as someone who was really kind of seeking for answers before, like it's really hard to accept that, because it kind of makes you drop everything, right? Like, well, you know, whatever someone else says, it may not work for me. It may not apply. It may not be anything for me. Right? Like I may have a completely different experience, and to have to actually make room for that, which means it's maybe an unfamiliar path, and always having to then tap into, well, that kind of curiosity, right? That like, well, I don't know what's going to come out of this, or where it's going to go, or what's what, but this is where I'm at. And really having to kind of own that and see that as for me, the only honest thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's nice, but it's also, I find hard at times to actually, like, I feel that resistance, right? Like, but
I used to get angry, really, really, really angry. I think I've written about. I mean, I know I've written about parts of it. There was a he was my TM teacher, and he had weekly meetings, and I would tell him that I was so angry because I wanted. I felt like he was making a promise, but he wasn't he wasn't really delivering on it. I said, okay, you're telling me that you're enlightened, that you've done this process and you achieved the final outcome. But the process that you're giving me in order to achieve that, it just doesn't feel satisfying. I want the real goods. I want to know what it is that I can do. I want to know how I can actually feel that I'm making progress. Because if I want to travel from where I am to Alaska, I can measure my progress. I'll know if I end up in Florida, I'm going the wrong way. It's very clear. And so I would express my anger to him, and he would tell me that it was my karma. I had bad karma. But that I who knows, maybe that was a very helpful, useful thing for him to tell me. But my sense of it now is it would have been more helpful to say that right there, that anger that sense that there's somewhere else that you should be, that's it. That's exactly it. That you're already there. Doesn't feel like it because you're conditioned to think that you're supposed to be somewhere else. But that, if you really inquire into that and really explore that, that might reveal to you what it is that you're actually seeking for, which is to drop the seeking for being somewhere else, or the idea that somebody else can deliver you salvation or anything at all.
That the fact that you and Lewis have talked about it in your previous videos and even on your blog has really kind of, it's not something I considered before, that it is your experience. Like how can anybody guide that? They can relate, but even their understanding of your experience is their understanding of their own experience to relate to yours.
Mm-hmm.
And that really kind of, that's been really helpful to me to actually pay a bit more attention to my own experience and my experience of that. Because it's, that's the only immediate thing I have, right? To ask someone else is to then reroute back to me.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you have said things like you don't know that what might be useful for someone else, my initial resistance to that was, well, okay, but that leaves me with myself, right? Like, if you don't know, I got to go back to me. And realizing that that's really what I was trying to get away from.
Mm-hmm.
Because I felt ill-equipped. I felt like, well, I don't have the answers, so can you have the answers for me?
Mm-hmm.
And that, the idea that there is an answer even.
Mm-hmm.
So that's been really helpful to me to see that, well, why can't I have them for myself? Whatever they look like. I mean, maybe they don't even look like answers. But why not stay and not kind of go outside myself to help myself? If that makes sense.
Yeah, well, what if this is the answer?
Right.
We're always spending our time looking around where maybe it's over there, maybe it's over there, what about there? And then this is it, here it is.
Right. Yeah. What if this is it, right? Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, it's puzzling to me still when spiritual teachers will talk about how they found answers. It doesn't make sense. Even if they don't put it in those terms, it still are hinting that they found answers. I don't know how that would be possible. Because I wasn't actually aware that there was a question. It seems like we invent questions, so to speak. I mean, questions happen, but we can ask the question and really puzzle over it as if it's a very serious thing. What is the meaning of life? But is that question inherent in life, or because it seems to me actually that that it's already given. The meaning of life is this. This is it. I mean, what about life actually poses that question? I don't find anything in life that poses that question. It seems obvious. Here it is. But then the question arises, what is the meaning of life? And then we take it very seriously, as if there's an answer to it. That's outside of what's happening, as if this wasn't already it. So the questions don't even, I don't think the questions are even valid, to be honest. Like, who am I? What is this? It's given. It's obvious. Who am I? Here it is. What is this? Here it is. It's like, here it is. Always here it is. This is, you're looking for the answer. Here it is. But we're just conditioned to think it has to be something else. Like you're going to be able to step outside of what's happening. And there's a meta layer outside of what's happening. And that meta layer is some kind of commentary on what's happening, in which there can be it's like we view life like it's a football game or something. and in that sense, it's like the commentary, the sports commentary, I mean, it's inane. It's just absolutely stupid. I don't know if you've ever, I don't watch sports, but I used to as a kid, and absolutely stupid. I mean, I don't know how those people can live with themselves. And I think if we view the questions that are supposedly about life like sports commentary, we'd see just how stupid it is. They talk about I only know baseball really, to be honest, and they'll say so, well, Ricky, he's up to bat, he's got a 3.3, whatever average, and what do you think he's gonna do, Ricky? What do you think he's gonna do? I think he's gonna swing, Bob. I think he's gonna swing the bat. Like that's what we're doing in life. Like, what's gonna happen? What's gonna happen? And nobody knows. But then we go to Adia Shanti and we say, Adia, what's gonna happen? And Adia tells us something, and we say, Adia knows.
I was definitely kind of pulled into that, and still feel that a lot of times. I like the idea of having something profound, right? Like to put my life in this, like this is a profound experience, and that it's something of a big magnitude. Like I feel that like egoic pull, I'd like to have that label. And that for me, so I'm a Muslim, and a Shia Muslim, and there's a particular sect. We don't really read the Quran, but the knowledge is kind of passed around more verbally, and part of that was that the purpose of life is to know yourself, to come back to the source, and return to the one, or however you want to phrase it. And so for me, for a long time, it was like I'm at a distance from where I need to be, in that religious sense. So it's nice, and it has been nice to think that, well, there is some bigger purpose, right? That like, how can I feel really good about my life? Well, maybe if I do something great, or if I get to that finish line. And it for a long time, it was very, very convincing, to the point that I never questioned it. I just kind of set on that path. And now questioning it more, like there's a lot of humor in it, right? Like it seems very futile too, and that like, where am I really going? Like I'm at a distance from what? If it is now and here and accessible, why not right now and right here? And yet I do find that this is something that I'm learning more of. That I'm sort of like better in touch with that, and sometimes feel more at distance from it, even though I know, like, I mean, it's kind of lost in the words there, but because it used to be very profound, or very like strong in my faith, that there are different levels of progress, and that different levels of enlightenment. And yet, if you sit and meditate without expectation, that was sort of the key, that you can't kind of demand it, that you will be graced with this experience. And so here, like it's sort of like the pink elephant. Like, how do you try to be humble when you're told you shouldn't be? I mean, it's, like I'm doing all the right things. So I kind of think I'm going to get it, but I'm not supposed to think I'm going to get it, so so it's certainly something like I've been challenging that for the past few years, but even trying to come into my own in terms of like being more, I guess, authentic, the way that I act, the way that I am around people, not really worrying about what they think as much, being more okay with myself and the way that I feel about things, and not thinking all the time that like something is wrong with me. I'm kind of having that experience more, which is nice, and also really revealing to me that like how much I was just kind of on autopilot, just moving out of fear or conditioning or
do you feel
feeling of a mandate.
But do you feel that that's not the case now? You enjoy what's happening now more.
Yes.
Yeah. But is it less autopilot?
I guess, no, maybe it's still autopilot, but it's not like what I want to do moves more from what I want to do as opposed to what I've just been taught to do.
Right. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Which when I questioned, I was like, well, I'm actually really afraid. Like, I think I should go to my mosque. I think I should act this way, or this is an appropriate thing to do, and a nice, polite thing. Mm-hmm. And I still might feel that way now, but maybe less. Like, it's because I want to. And I'm more open with the fact that, well, I don't always feel like that. And that doesn't necessarily make me a good or bad person. Like, even if it does, well, I can't really help it if I feel that way. No. So and I think that was sort of the impetus to even reach out, that like I'm starting to find ways that I'm feeling better and more honest, and yet I don't feel like they're consistent, and that like I keep needing to have those moments where I re-inspire myself. Is there something that I'm missing that's sort of like a click, and like I don't need to do that anymore? I don't need to keep reminding myself that it's such an innate understanding that it's just there all the time. Like that seeking just stops.
Mm-hmm. And this is seeking this is a specific seeking, though. This is the seeking for feeling all right with yourself.
Yeah, or I mean, I guess rooted too in the idea that like if I have to make a decision about, doing something or entering or leaving a relationship with someone, that my sense would be that maybe I have more clarity around that. If I'm more in touch with things, maybe I don't have so much anxiety around what's the right thing to do. And maybe I won't even be worried about the right thing to do. I'll just kind of move through and maybe feel some anxiety, but I'm not going to feel so like, like what's right.
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, that question of what's right. I've never been able to find the answer to that. But, again, it may be like the sports commentary, what's right. I don't know. We'll find out, because it's going to happen.
Yeah.
I mean, that's for me, that's the, you mentioned control earlier, and it's that getting it right. What's the right thing? Is this right? Has a lot to do with, in just my experience, it has a lot to do with control. Am I going to get this right? I've got kids, and so that for me kind of exacerbated that. Am I doing the right thing? Am I screwing up their lives. It's been very humbling to recognize I'm not such a great person. I think I thought my parents were horrible. No, that's not true. My parents were very good parents in many respects, but of course, as their child, I thought they were horrible. And I thought, oh, I'm going to be much better than them. And then I look at the chaos of my life and my children's lives, and I think, oh, my parents were much better parents than me. But wanting to get it right, I mean, yeah. I've never gotten it right. Never. I can't think of a single time when I've gotten it right. Because every time that I try to get it right, then later on, the expression hindsight is 20/20. So it's always like that. I think I'm getting it right, and then I look back on it, I say, oh, that was wrong. And then I say, well, now I'm going to correct course. I'm going to get it right this time. Because now I've got all this great wisdom and insight, because I know all these years of doing the wrong thing. Now I know what the right thing is. I figured it out. And then I do that. And then a month later, or sometimes even 10 seconds later, I recognize, oh, no, that was the wrong thing. I think it's just a game. I think it's a game that happens where we're just, it's just sort of rather than there being some sort of moral implication to it. My sense of it is it's just how we move. Because if you got it right, I mean, if you think about it, if you got it right, everything right, and you had that kind of certainty, what is right all the time, and you're always going to get it right. You have confidence you're always going to get it right. You no longer have to do anything. Or you certainly would no longer want to do anything. It takes all of the mystery and excitement out of it. You'd probably get depressed. You'd probably stop getting out of bed. Oh God, another day just doing it right. And it sounds so nice until you really think about it and realize, oh yeah, I think that the values that we place on right and wrong, I mean, those are loaded words, right and wrong. But I'd say it's rather than right and wrong, let's call them right and left. It's just direction. It's just we're just moving. Okay, I'll do this. Let's do this now. Just moving. And maybe it's possible for that. I don't know that this is true, but it seems to me that my experience is that through inquiry of the kind that I've described, of just being willing to take an honest look at what is right and wrong. What's my experience of that? What is the motivation here? What am I trying to achieve? And not to answer these questions, but just to see what's happening, does seem to loosen that kind of moral overlay, so that it's not so unpleasant. Like, I've got to get it right. If I don't get it right, I'll be a failure, and then I'll be punished, and God will hate me, and on and on and on. Yeah. And also just seeing that it's impossible. Not only, I mean, like I project onto these supernatural beings, all of these things, the supernatural beings that I've never actually had an experience of, but I can also see that those projections, in a way, are intended to kind of protect me. It's like the way that I can protect myself from the closer fear, which is the fear of the rejection, cultural and social rejection. I'm going to be rejected by my friends and family and by my neighbors because I'm going to be wrong. And So just, taking a look at that has been useful for me, just to see I don't get to control that either. I don't get to control any of it. But the one thing that I'm fairly sure of seems to be the case in my life is that when I've tried to control that, not only have I failed, but it's been miserable. Spending all of this time and energy worrying about, am I going to successfully control how others view me so that I can ensure that they will never reject me, they'll always love me, I'll always be approved of, and then I'll get the feeling that I want. And I never get it. I mean, even when I get the approval, I'm like, oh, but it was fake. It was all fake. They don't really approve of me. They approve of the fake me that I projected. So then it creates this anxiety and this sense of there's the real me and the fake me and all of this nonsense, which is horrible. So I do think that kind of inquiry can be helpful. Maybe.
Yeah, I was going to ask, because I find when I do the inquiry to sort of see like the futility of it, yes, sometimes it is helpful. For me, oftentimes more than not. But to get myself to the point of being willing to do the inquiry, or even kind of seeing, like not being caught in the like anxiety of it, and being willing to do that inquiry, that is challenging for me. Sometimes I know better, but I don't, I just don't. Like I still, like I'll have that decision, and yeah, I understand that if I really look, it's rooted in a sense of approval that I might want from my parents or friends, or a certain image associated with making one decision versus another. But getting to that point of really seeing that, and even like willing to, because sometimes I'll be caught in like the chaos of that feeling that like I don't really want to admit that it's futile, or that it's rooted in things that maybe are false. And so I've been wondering for myself that, well, if I do this enough and kind of inquire enough, then maybe I just feel anxiety about making a decision, and I'm like, oh, okay, well, remember that time you felt that same anxiety about making a decision, and you went down the road and you found out that it's okay to make either decision, like to actually feel that it's okay, that moral kind of direction loses its stickiness. Then maybe if I do that enough times, it'll help. I don't know. I mean, I don't. It's nice to think that, I guess.
Yeah, I don't know. It does for me. It does seem to be true, at least in some areas of my life, where I think it's just a matter of habit. Become comfortable enough with a particular mode of being or action, so that the fear of the unknown becomes less, because I've done it enough, so I know that the outcome it didn't result in I'm still alive, still able to feed myself. So I think that seems to be true.
Yeah.
But I can't say whether it would be true always in all cases. And I don't know. I mean, there's the problem is, that it can generate this new I think it's useful. I mean, for me at least, it's useful to recognize that this process of wanting to improve things, to improve my experience, seems to be ongoing. And at the same time, it seems that there aspects of that which I can recognize as being unnecessary and let go of. So, because sometimes it just gets, it goes back to that point I probably didn't make all that elegantly, but the one, you know, with the two drunks who sober up. Maybe the guy who's going to his support group every day, maybe after a while it just starts to be a drag and he doesn't want to do it anymore. So I find that seems to be my experience, is that there are certain processes that happen in my life that are useful for a while, and then after a while they're not really. And so then the challenge is letting go, even though, again, there's going to be fear. It's like there's always fear. I don't know a way to get rid of the fear. Fear is the fear seems to be the fear of the unknown, and the unknown seems to be infinite and unavoidable. In fact, it seems to all be unknown, but we just have certain illusions of knowability. But the illusions of knowability just seem to get, after a while, they become unpleasant. So I can have the illusion of knowability that if I go to my support group, I'm not going to drink. But then after a while, that starts to nag at me. You know, is that actually true? Or is it even true that I need to not drink? You know, I mean, all of these things are starting to nag. You know, I'm not sure. And by the way, I don't really want to go. I'd like, especially that Wednesday group. It's not any fun, and the lighting's bad, and you know, it's far away, so I don't want to go. I'm only going because I have this sense that I need to, have to, in order to maintain the known of sobriety. So that's sort of my life, you know, is that it's like there are certain things that seem to be really useful until they start to be a drag, and then okay, can I let go? You know, it goes back to looking for answers. I think we are trained and taught that there is an answer, and once you know the answer, then forever and ever you'll have the answer, and you'll be free, and you won't have to do anything anymore. But I don't think that's true. I think that, I mean, my experience is that there doesn't seem to be an answer, and there just seems to be letting go. But it's not an either or. It's not like you have to let go of everything. That's because, you know, the guy who's recently sober and who does actually depend on those groups to remain sober and wants to be sober, if he lets go of the support groups and starts drinking again, that's not what he wants. So it's useful for him to have the support groups so he can remain sober, because that's what he wants. For a person who finds their religion to be valuable, why would I would never recommend to anybody to give up their religion if they find it useful and valuable in their lives. But if you you know, if there's a point in your life when you say, well, I don't know, it's not really working for me, then at that point in your life, you have the opportunity to let go. Not because it's better. I mean, not it might be better for you, but not at that point, but not because it's better. Like we can make this rule that all people should be without religion because religion is bad across the board for all people. But for some people, at some points in their lives, religion becomes an unnecessary weight upon them that in a sense it restricts that authenticity. So I don't know. I think it's just an ongoing process. I think it's a game.
it kind of keeps pointing, at least me, back to me. What works for me?
Yeah. Yeah, right. I mean, I think that's brilliant, and I like that should be the big takeaway from this conversation for people who are watching. I think is to just find out for yourself right now. I mean, not that I'm prescribing that. But that seems. I mean, that seems great to me. That seems very liberating to me to recognize that nobody else can give me. Nobody else can tell me. Nobody can give me any answer that would be useful if we're talking about my experience, my existence. Because how would they know? And if I think that I found the answer, I'm probably mistaken. Because guess what? Life is happening. It's always changing. You think, oh, I need to be more authentic, and this is how I should be authentic. I need to be more honest, and you do that, and it seems right, and then one day you realize, oh, I was just being an asshole. Like nobody else needed me to do that. That was.
Yeah. And I also find that like sometimes I say things that I want, but I don't really know what that means. Like I want to feel better, but I don't know what that would look like. I mean, I don't know that I've even necessarily put in the time to figure that out, because then maybe I would actually do it. It's just this arbitrary like habit, maybe.
Yeah, I can relate to that. I mean, sometimes it does seem like I want to feel better, and that's why I was describing if I that strategy that I have of softening, because that seems to sometimes reveal, I don't need to do anything. There's not really even a problem. Sometimes it reveals, oh yeah, I really do feel shitty, and it's because I've been clenching my fists or my jaw or something. Sometimes it reveals, gosh, I have no idea. I just feel really shitty, and there doesn't seem to be anything I can do about it.
Yeah.
But in any case, it does, for me, seem to be useful to do that kind of strategy, because it saves me from doing a lot of stuff that is not helpful. Because otherwise, I have really bizarre ideas about what the problem is. It's because of whatever. I mean, I think it's because of this person and what he's doing, or it's because of this behavior that I'm engaged in. Then it turns out neither of those are problems at all. Sometimes they are, though. I don't know.
One of my bizarre thoughts, as you call them, was sort of like to just always find someone else as the problem. And maybe that was the case, but it just was like really unhappy for me, because how can I have my feelings put entirely in someone else's hands? Like I just was sort of at their mercy entirely.
Mm-hmm.
So that's been something that, like, well, instead of thinking that, I just kind of, okay, well, what do I have to work with in my own sort of self, so that I'm not looking for it from someone else, because that to me was just sort of like a losing battle.
Yeah, and for me, I can relate to that in that it seems somewhat ironic that if I think that somebody else is responsible for my feeling, then the tendency is going to be for me to put a lot of energy into trying to control the other person to behave the way that I think they should, so that I can feel the way that I want to feel, which is not going to work. Just, at least in my experience, it never worked. Never. And it just ended up making me an asshole. I mean, I thought I was a nice guy, but it turned out I was really manipulative. And to finally recognize that this person is not responsible for how I feel, it reveals this whole, then I'm actually able to maybe take action that could be healthy. It's like if somebody's, if there's a relationship with somebody that's just not working, rather than investing all this energy into trying to manipulate the person to be who I want them to be and who they are not and don't want to be, I can instead just say, you know what, it's not working. Let's not see one another anymore. and everybody's happier.
Yeah.
So much nicer.
Yeah.
Well, we've been talking for a while, so this has been very nice, but I think we should wrap it up.
Sounds good.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks for having me on the show and taking the time to chat with me.
Yep. Bye for now.
Bye.